The Friday night crowd at Tom's Diner was unlike anything the little place had seen before. Every booth was filled, the sound of silverware clinking against plates mixing with low conversations. But tonight wasn't just busy, it was history in the making. The mayor had chosen Tom's Diner to host his fundraiser dinner, a night packed with council members, business owners, and neighbours who could decide the future of the town. For Tom, a single father who had spent years keeping the diner alive, it felt like the entire weight of his life rested on this one evening. Behind the swinging kitchen doors, it was chaos. Pots clanged, orders piled up, and the air was thick with the smell of sauces that never seemed quite right. The head chef, normally confident, was on edge. He wiped his forehead, muttering about how his reputation was on the line, while his assistants scrambled to keep up. Tom stood near the pass-through window, his heart pounding as he watched dish after dish fail to meet the mark. This wasn't just another dinner service. If the mayor walked away unimpressed, the fundraiser would flop, his diner's name would be dragged down, and the contracts he had hoped for would vanish. He thought of his son that morning, sitting at the counter with a paper cup of orange juice, asking softly, "Dad, do you think the diner will always be ours?" Tom had promised yes, even though deep inside he wasn't sure. And now, as the clock ticked louder, that promise felt like it was slipping through his hands. In the far corner, away from the storm of panic, Maria quietly stacked plates fresh from the sink. She moved with calm rhythm, unnoticed by the frenzy around her. She wasn't a chef, not a manager, just the dishwasher, at least that's what everyone thought. What no one realised was that she had been watching, listening, and smelling every failed attempt all night. And though she kept her head down, something in her eyes said she couldn't stay silent forever. Maria wasn't the kind of person anyone paid attention to. Most of the staff barely knew more about her than her name. She came in early, tied her hair back, kept her head down, and scrubbed dishes until her hands turned red from the hot water. She never complained, never raised her voice, and never asked for more than what she had. To everyone else, she was just the dishwasher. But Tom had noticed little things. The way she sometimes paused, eyes fixed on the kitchen line when the chefs argued about flavours. The way she handled food scraps before tossing them, touching and smelling them like she was reading a story hidden inside. It was subtle, almost invisible, but to a man who spent his life in a diner, Tom had learned to see more than what people showed. Still, tonight wasn't the time to think about Maria. He had bigger problems. The mayor was only minutes away from being served, and his chefs were running out of ideas. The head chef slammed down a ladle, muttering under his breath, while the younger cooks looked like they might walk out from the pressure. The kitchen, usually a place of rhythm and teamwork, had become a battlefield of frustration. Maria stood at the edge of it all, drying her hands on a worn towel. She didn't say anything, but her eyes lingered on the simmering pot of sauce and the half-prepared steak sitting on the counter. She tilted her head slightly, as if something about it wasn't right. She wanted to speak, to step closer, but who was she in this kitchen? A dishwasher interrupting professional chefs would be laughed out of the room. And yet, as Tom's voice cut through the chaos, "We're running out of time, people!" Maria felt her heart beat faster. She looked down at her hands, still damp from the sink, then back at the failing dishes. Something inside her told her she couldn't stay silent much longer. The kitchen grew hotter by the minute, steam rising in waves and tempers burning just as fast. The head chef tried again, ladling sauce over the steak with a sharp flick of his wrist. He tasted it, grimaced, and shoved the spoon into Tom's hand. Tom took a bite, and the disappointment showed instantly. The flavours clashed, too salty, too bitter, nothing close to what was needed for a night like this. He set the spoon down hard against the counter. "This isn't it," Tom muttered, his voice tight. The head chef's face reddened, not only from the heat. "I know," he snapped, pacing in front of the stove, "but do you understand what's happening here? If this night goes south, it's not just your diner's name on the line, mine too. I've spent years building a reputation in this town, and it'll all be gone if we serve food that tastes like failure." The younger cooks exchanged uneasy glances, shrinking under the tension. No one dared suggest another idea. They all knew the truth. Time was slipping away, and every new attempt only seemed worse than the last. From the dining room came the sound of laughter and clinking glasses, a reminder that the mayor and his guests were waiting. Tom felt his chest tighten, the weight of everything pressing down, his diner, his son, his father's legacy. If the fundraiser failed, it would all collapse. At the edge of the chaos, Maria stood frozen by the sink. Her hands were damp from scrubbing, her towel clutched tight. She had been silent all night, but watching yet another plate fall short felt unbearable. She could see the mistake so clearly. It was right there in front of them. Her lips parted as if to speak, but fear held her back. She was just the dishwasher. Who would listen? Still, as Tom's voice rose again, "We're running out of time." Her pulse quickened. She knew that if she stayed quiet any longer, she would have to watch everything crumble. And something deep inside her refused to let that happen. The silence between failures grew heavier. The chefs had run out of ideas, and Tom's patience was hanging by a thread. He rubbed his forehead, staring at the clock on the wall, wishing for a miracle. That was when a voice, quiet but steady, cut through the noise. "May I try something?" Every head in the kitchen turned. Maria stood by the sink, her hands twisting the towel nervously, but her eyes, those eyes, held a spark of confidence that surprised even her. For a second no one spoke. Then the head chef barked out a short laugh. "You? Try what? You think scrubbing pans qualifies you to fix this?" He shook his head and turned back to the stove, muttering under his breath about wasting time. A few of the younger cooks snickered, the sound sharp and dismissive. Tom looked at Maria, caught between disbelief and the memory of all the times he had noticed her paying close attention when no one else did. Something in her voice lingered with him, but the risk was huge. The mayor's dinner wasn't a place for experiments. Maria swallowed hard, forcing herself not to back down. "I grew up learning how to make dishes like this. I see where it keeps going wrong. Just let me try once. If it doesn't work, I'll go back to the sink and stay quiet." The kitchen buzzed with murmurs, half amusement, half annoyance. Tom's gaze shifted from the tired, beaten-down chefs to the dishwasher, who suddenly seemed like the only person willing to take a chance. His heart pounded in his chest. If he said yes, he might lose everything in front of the most important table of his career. But if he said no, they were heading toward failure anyway. Tom's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. The room was buzzing, chefs shuffling pans and muttering about the mayor's table, but for him, everything slowed. Maria's words echoed in his head. "Let me try once." He glanced toward the dining room, where laughter drifted in through the half-open door. Important people sat out there, waiting. People who could make or break his diner with a single complaint. He thought of the bank loans, the second mortgage, the years of pouring himself into this place while raising his boy alone. If tonight collapsed, all of that sacrifice might mean nothing. His chest ached at the memory of his son that morning, sitting at the counter with a glass of orange juice, asking softly, "Dad, will the diner still be ours when I grow up?" Tom had smiled then, trying to sound certain, but right now, with the kitchen failing around him, he wasn't sure of anything. Maria stood still, towel in hand, eyes steady, even as the others smirked at her. There was something in her expression, something that said she had been here before, that she knew what it felt like to be overlooked and doubted. Tom felt a flicker of recognition. He knew that feeling too. The head chef slammed a pan onto the stove. "We don't have time for games," he snapped. "We need a real solution." Tom exhaled slowly, his decision hanging in the air. Every pair of eyes in the kitchen was on him now, waiting for his call. He could hear his own heartbeat louder than the clatter of pots. Finally, he turned toward Maria. "All right," he said, his voice low but firm. "Show us what you can do." The room froze. The chef stared in disbelief. Maria blinked, her breath catching, then stepped forward with trembling hands that slowly steadied as she reached for the counter. Maria set the towel aside and moved toward the counter, the eyes of the entire kitchen following her every step. The clatter of pans and hurried voices seemed to fade as she reached for the cutting board. Her hands were damp, her heart racing, but once she picked up the knife, something shifted. The tremble left her fingers. Her movements grew steady, deliberate. The head chef folded his arms, smirking like he was watching a child play pretend. A few cooks exchanged doubtful looks. Tom stood silent near the door, torn between fear of humiliation and a strange, growing hope he couldn't explain. Maria laid out the ingredients with quiet precision. She tasted the sauce first, closing her eyes for a moment, then shook her head slightly. "Too heavy," she whispered to herself, almost like she was speaking to the food rather than the people watching. She reached for fresh herbs, crushing them gently between her fingers, releasing a clean, sharp fragrance that cut through the stale air of the kitchen. She worked quickly, but with a calm rhythm that no one else had managed all night. She adjusted the heat, seared the steak with a careful press, and added the herbs at just the right moment. The sizzle filled the silence. For the first time that evening, the kitchen didn't sound frantic, it sounded focused. Tom found himself holding his breath as he watched. Something about the way Maria moved reminded him of his father, who had taught him to cook simple meals back when the diner was just a tiny roadside stop. It wasn't about showing off, it was about respect, for the food, for the people you served, for the chance to create something that mattered. The aroma spread through the room, rich and balanced, drawing even the skeptics closer. No one spoke now. They simply watched as the dishwasher, the woman everyone had overlooked, guided the kitchen back to life with nothing but her quiet confidence. And when she finally lifted the pan, plating the steak with a sauce that gleamed under the kitchen lights, there was no more laughter, only silence and the weight of a question hanging in the air. Would this be the dish that saved the night, or would it all come crashing down the moment it left the kitchen? The plate sat on the counter, steam rising in soft curls, the sauce glistening under the harsh kitchen lights. For a moment, no one moved. Every eye in the room was fixed on Tom. He picked up a fork, his hand unsteady, and cut a small piece of steak. The sound of metal scraping against the plate felt louder than the clatter of pots. He lifted the bite to his mouth, and the room seemed to fall silent all at once. The head chef crossed his arms, his jaw tight, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of worry. The younger cooks leaned closer, barely breathing. Even Maria, who had plated the dish with steady hands, now clasped her fingers together at her waist, her heart pounding so hard it almost hurt. Tom chewed slowly. Too slowly. His face was unreadable. No frown, no smile, nothing. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. The only sound was the faint sizzle from a forgotten pan on the stove. Finally, Tom set down the fork. He stood still, looking at the plate as though weighing every word. The silence pressed down heavier with each heartbeat. "Well?" the head chef demanded, trying to sound dismissive but failing to hide the crack in his voice. Tom looked up, his eyes scanning the room, then landing on Maria. His shoulders, tense for hours, finally eased. "It's right," he said quietly. For a second, no one reacted, as if they couldn't believe what they had just heard. Then whispers rippled through the kitchen, half disbelief, half awe. The head chef shifted uncomfortably, his confidence shaken. Maria didn't smile or gloat. She only whispered steady and calm, "Serve it before it loses the heat." Tom took a breath, picked up the plate, and pushed open the swinging doors. The kitchen held its breath behind him. Whatever happened next in the dining room would decide everything. The dining room was alive with chatter, glasses clinking, and the faint hum of a jazz tune from the old speakers in the corner. But when Tom stepped out of the kitchen carrying the plate, it felt like the whole room tilted toward him. His palms were damp, and every step felt heavier than the last. He approached the long table where the mayor sat, surrounded by council members, business owners, and familiar faces from town. They were laughing, sipping wine, completely unaware of the storm raging just beyond the kitchen doors. Tom set the plate gently in front of the mayor, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Thank you for your patience. I hope this will be worth the wait." The mayor, a man known for his sharp tongue and sharper standards, cut into the steak without a word. He lifted the first bite to his mouth, and suddenly the room seemed to shrink. Conversations dimmed, chairs stopped moving, and even the servers leaned closer, as though the outcome of the night depended on this single taste. He chewed slowly, too slowly. Tom's heart hammered in his chest, his eyes locked on the mayor's face, searching for a flicker of reaction. Maria stood half hidden in the doorway, her apron wrinkled, her hands clasped tightly together. She wasn't supposed to care so much, but her whole body leaned forward, waiting. Then the mayor set down his fork. A pause, his brow furrowed as if considering something deeply. Tom felt his stomach drop, but just when the silence became unbearable, the mayor leaned back and let out a satisfied laugh. "This," he said, patting the table with his hand, "is the best thing I've tasted in a long while." The room broke into applause. Relief flooded Tom so fast it nearly brought him to his knees. He glanced toward the kitchen, locking eyes with Maria. For the first time that night, she allowed herself the smallest smile. But for Tom, one question now burned brighter than the rest. Who exactly was this woman he had nearly overlooked? Hours later, the dining room had emptied, the lights dimmed, and the fundraiser was over. The applause had faded, but Tom could still feel its echo in his chest. The diner had survived. More than that, it had shined. Yet the question gnawed at him. How had Maria, the quiet dishwasher, carried a skill that no one else in his kitchen had seen? He found her at the sink, as always, rinsing plates in steady silence. She looked the same as she always did, but Tom knew better now. He leaned against the counter, his voice softer than it had been all night. "You saved this place," he said. Maria didn't answer right away. She finished rinsing a plate, set it on the rack, and dried her hands on a towel. Only then did she turn to him. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried a weight that made Tom's chest tighten. "I didn't save anything," she said gently. "I just remembered what I was taught." Tom frowned. "By who?" She hesitated, then reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. The cover was faded, the pages frayed at the edges, stained with years of cooking. She held it with both hands, almost reverently. "My mother kept this," she explained. "She taught me everything I know in this little book. When I was young, she told me cooking wasn't just about food, it was about family, about giving people something that made them feel whole." Her voice softened. "I carried it with me when I left home. Even when life got hard, I couldn't let it go." Tom watched as she opened the notebook to a page smudged with fingerprints and splashes of sauce. Handwritten notes and sketches filled the margins. "When my husband died, I had to put my dreams aside," she continued. "I chose steady work so I could be there for my daughter. Dishwashing kept the lights on. But every night when she went to sleep, I'd read through these recipes just to remind myself I hadn't lost everything." Tom swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her story. He thought of his own son, of the mornings at the counter, of the promise he was desperate to keep. He understood her sacrifice, because he lived it too. Maria closed the notebook and held it to her chest. "Tonight was the first time in years I used one of her recipes. I guess it still works." Tom stood in silence, humbled, realizing the truth. The answer to saving his diner hadn't come from flashy techniques or expensive training. It had come from a woman carrying a legacy in a tattered notebook and the courage to open it when it mattered most. The diner was quiet after midnight, the last chair flipped onto its table, the lights low except for the warm glow over the counter. Tom stood with his arms folded, watching Maria as she slipped the worn recipe notebook back into her apron. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Tom cleared his throat. "You know," he said, "my dad used to tell me this diner would only survive if we remembered one thing, that food isn't just about filling plates. It's about caring for the people sitting at the table." His eyes softened. "Tonight you reminded me of that." Maria lowered her gaze, her voice almost a whisper. "I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just didn't want to see this place fall apart. It deserves better. Deserves." Tom took a step closer. "And so do you. I don't want you stuck at that sink anymore. You belong in this kitchen, Maria, not as a dishwasher, but as my partner." He paused, his voice firm but kind. "We'll work out the hours so you can still be there for your daughter, but this diner needs you too." For a heartbeat, Maria just stared at him, unsure if she'd heard right. Then her eyes glistened, and she nodded slowly. "If we do this," she said, her voice steady, "we do it together." Tom extended his hand. She placed hers in his, worn from years of work, yet strong. The handshake sealed more than an agreement, it sealed a new chapter. Weeks passed, and word spread through town. At first, people came because they'd heard about the mayor's dinner, curious about the miracle dish. But when they sat down, when they tasted the meals crafted with Maria's touch, and felt the warmth of a diner reborn, they stayed. They came back, again and again, not just for the food, but for the feeling. On any given night, Tom could be seen at the counter with his son Maria moving gracefully through the kitchen, her daughter sometimes colouring at a corner booth. The diner was no longer just a place to eat, it was a place that felt like home. And in the end, that was the real secret, not recipes, not titles, not fancy credentials. The reason people returned was because every dish carried a story of sacrifice, of second chances, of love poured quietly into every plate. Because sometimes the most valuable ingredient in a kitchen isn't found in the pantry, it's found in the hearts of the people who refuse to give up. Lesson: at the heart of this story, one truth stands out. Talent and wisdom are often hidden in plain sight. Maria reminded us that greatness doesn't always come with a title, a uniform, or a spotlight. Sometimes it's carried quietly, in the hands of people who work unseen, holding on to love and resilience that the world forgets to notice. Question: so let me ask you, how many times have we overlooked someone because of where they stood or what job they held? And what might happen if, instead of doubting, we gave them the chance to show us who they really are? Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story touched you, I invite you to reflect on it tonight, and maybe share your own thoughts below. Until we meet again, this is Rain Inside, wishing you peace, strength, and a good night.